Welcome to the Know. I'm Ashley.
I'm Mica.
So with all this fighting going on about microtransactions this fall, and it's been, what, 12 hours since we did an update about microtransactions last? Well, good news. Good news. It looks like the tide might actually be turning in favor of the gamers who want them gone from video games forever.
That is right, the noose is tightening on ye old loot boxes because now several government regulators have spoken in favor of banning them.
Yeah, so in the last 24 hours, we've seen some very, very strong statements from the Belgium Gambling Commission and a state representative of Hawaii, which I didn't even know the Hawaii conversation was happening, but that's fantastic, likening the types of loot box transactions seen in Star Wars Battlefront 2 with an online casino disguised to steal kids' money.
Well, boy, that escalated quickly.
Normally you gotta be a bully to get this kind of money. Now you just be a business.
Yep, last week everyone was griping about grinding for Darth Vader, and now Hawaii is marching behind loot boxes yelling, shame!
Shame. And the loot boxes are naked. So let's break down these latest two developments in the fight against loot boxes and predatory microtransactions, what this actually means, because right now there's a lot of there's a lot of misinformation and wild speculation going around about how serious some of this is. At the moment, it is, and it isn't. That's politics.
But Ashley, who's going to speak up for the loot boxes? Well, okay, well, probably.
We will.
No one is. No one is right now. Because before we jump into the latest loot box pylon, let's give another very brief TLDR in case you've missed the multiple loot box controversies that's been going on because you've been avoiding the internet rage machine in favor of doing something, you know, constructive, like playing those video games or getting
Animal Crossing.
Right, Animal Crossing.
Which has microtransactions.
Right, or you could be getting mad about net neutrality instead.
Yeah, so if you don't want to go through the, the hours of stuff we've done on microtransactions already, make a short version. Gamers have been getting very upset about increasingly shady loot box practices seen in full-price AAA games this fall. All that culminated in the EA-published Star Wars Battlefront 2, which had the misfortune of being the last of the bunch, but also had some of the most overreaching we've seen yet, with lots of in-game content stuck behind grinding that could be bypassed with loot boxes and changed the performance of the game. Like, it actually changed the balance.
Gamers lashed out at the game and EA, which caused them to pull back on those microtransactions completely, but not before they caught the attention of several regulatory bodies, which just about gives the context we need to talk about what happened in the last day or so.
One of those regulatory bodies was the Belgium Gaming Commission, who first announced they were going to start investigating the practice of loot boxes last week when the anger over Battlefront 2 was at its peak. Now, looks like their investigation may be starting to lead them to the conclusion that loot boxes are in fact gambling as far as they're concerned.
Now, this is where there's just been a tad bit of misinformation, and most of that is because of translation.
It happens. Language is a thing.
The big report that started circulating yesterday was based on two things: a published report by the Gaming Commission about the information they've collected so far, and comments made by the Belgian Minister of Justice.
So as far as the report goes, one of these statements in it declares that the mixing of money and addiction is gambling. It goes on to talk about how it's going to be hard to regulate because of the current laws around gaming and gambling, but says that it can be achieved with cooperation.
The thing that led to some misinformation is that many saw the statement as the Commission's final conclusion, when in fact it was more of a statement of purpose about the entire report itself. When reached for a comment, Etienne Marique, the chairman of the Gambling Commission in the House, definitively said that they hadn't reached a decision yet about loot boxes, so yeah, people sort of just ran away with that statement.
But what they didn't run away with were comments made by Belgium's Minister of Justice, Jenkins. Despite the investigation not being finished, Jenkins came out hard against loot boxes, saying mixing gambling and gaming, especially at a young age, is dangerous for the mental health of the child.
He went on to say that if people don't know what they're purchasing, in-game purchases should be banned altogether, which would presumably include loot boxes with randomized content.
Because you don't know what exactly you're getting in that loot box.
Exactly. Following that, he said that they would go to the rest of Europe to see if they could push for the ban.
So, bottom line is, they are still investigating, but if they find that loot boxes fall into this category, Belgium's gonna petition for an EU-wide ban, which is a pretty big deal, but not in honesty, all that different from what they said before.
While some of those statements from both the Justice Minister and the Gaming Commission have come with a few doubts, there's no second-guessing the statements that came out of Hawaii yesterday, where State Representative Chris Lee held a press conference to condemn loot boxes.
No, this one was a surprise, but a positive one, I think, for a lot of gamers. In the presser, Lee calls Battlefront 2 a Star Wars-themed online casino designed to lure kids into spending money. So, Yeah, that's pretty telling.
Lee went on to say, this is something that we need to address to ensure that particularly kids who are underage, who are not psychologically and emotionally mature enough to be able to gamble, which is why gambling is prohibited under 21, are protected from being trapped into those cycles which have compelled many folks to spend thousands of dollars in gaming fees online. We're looking at legislation this coming year which could prohibit access or prohibit the sales of these games to folks who are underage in order to protect families, as well as prohibiting different kinds of mechanisms in those games.
Now, that's actually pretty important. If you look at Hollywood, for example, you see all these movies that are cut back to a PG-13 rating from an R, specifically so that they can get as many kids in as possible, because that means that they have a bigger pool of audience to get. It's also why you don't see a lot of adults-only games, because that severely limits the pool of consumers. Anyway, that all kind of goes. But anyway, Lee followed all that up with a Reddit post explaining that the video went out earlier than intended, where he called for gamers to step up and help. In his mind, these practices are designed to exploit, and it affects the future of entertainment in this country.
So, yeah, it's not really a great week for loot boxes.
Pretty good week for consumers, though.
True. The question now, however, is how we sort all of these political statements out and what this means for the future. But before some of you get your hopes up, it's important to note a few things. Namely, these are just preliminary statements of intent rather than conclusions or actual proposals or legislation that has actually gone through.
Yeah, nothing's going through law at this point. Now, it is important to remember the wheels of government tend to turn pretty slowly, especially where things like gambling and gaming and online elements are concerned. One Reddit poster reached out to the Victorian Commission for Gambling and Liquor Regulation, who, believe it or not, actually responded back, which is awesome. And according to them, technology has far outpaced legislation in a lot of these matters, making it a bit hard for them to catch up in any meaningful way, which will no doubt be the case with Belgium and the United States as well. Did you ever see the TV show? It was Almost Human. It didn't last very long, but I really liked it. It was basically about technology outpacing the ability for law to regulate it.
Huh. Or like Black Mirror.
It is also hot robots.
Ooh, hot robots. Financial analyst Daniel Ahmad on Twitter also added some thoughts, as well as he always does, based on what happened in China. When China came out hard against loot boxes, publishers eventually found ways around those laws because money.
So all eyes turn to China for examples. This doesn't mean loot boxes are gone. It could be that the nature of them may change if anything happens at all, or when it does happen. Another option is that could happen here potentially is that video games themselves decide to regulate this. I mean, that's basically what happened when the ESRB was created. The government threatened to step in and the industry itself created its own regulating body.
Because as nice as it would be for everyone who hates loot boxes and microtransactions, government regulation isn't always where you want the policing of the industry to come from. If that had been the case back in the 90s, for instance, you might have seen stricter regulations on games like Mortal Kombat, Duke Nukem, or even Doom. And don't you just love fatalities?
Fatalities are great.
Right.
Still, when publishers do start overstepping their bounds like this without very much regard for the effect it may be having on consumers, someone has to do something, and right now it doesn't seem like the ESRB or the industry wants to do anything about it. I mean, when it comes down to it, the ESRB and the ESA is mostly comprised of publishers who are looking out more for the company's interests than the consumer's interests.
Right. However, now that governments all over the world are closing in, that might exactly be what happens next.
Well, all right, and it's now making it in the company's best interest to potentially regulate themselves.
Right.
Anyway, what do you guys think of Belgium and Hawaii both taking aim at loot boxes? Let us know in the comments.
For future updates in the ongoing struggle of gamers versus microtransactions, remember to like this video, and if you're new around here, subscribe to the Know. Need to talk about what happened in the last day or so.
Yeah, one of those regulatory bodies was the Belgium Gambling Commission, Gaming. One of those regulatory bodies was the Belgium Gaming Commission, who first announced they were going to start investigating the practice of loot box? One of those regulatory bodies was the Belgium Gambling Commission, who, nope, still said it wrong again.